What would you do if your husband's phone lit up and another woman's message sounded like she had already taken a place in your marriage? It was a warm Tuesday afternoon in Arizona. Victoria Hale was alone in the kitchen when Dalton's phone vibrated on the counter. She glanced at the screen. One message was enough to make her reach for it. The sender was a woman named Aria. The message read, "I miss you. Last night wasn't enough." Victoria read it again, then a third time. She had never heard her husband mention Aria. But the message didn't sound like a first conversation. It sounded like a continuation. The other woman. Victoria was 36. She and Dalton had built an ordinary married life together. Work, bills, family plans, and the routines couples eventually stopped noticing. That afternoon, one phone notification made all of it feel uncertain. Victoria opened the conversation. There were weeks of messages, private meetings, late-night conversations, plans that Dalton had never mentioned. Then she recognized two places: a restaurant where Dalton had once told her he was meeting a client, and a hotel he had claimed he had never visited. Victoria kept reading. Then she found the message that hurt more than the first. "You keep telling me she doesn't know." Victoria stopped. Aria wasn't guessing that Dalton was married. She knew. And Dalton had apparently been assuring her that Victoria was still unaware. For Victoria, the betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was sitting in her husband's phone. That evening, Dalton walked through the door. He kissed Victoria, asked about her day, put his keys on the counter. Everything looked normal. Victoria watched him carefully. Then she asked, "Who is Aria?" Dalton's expression changed. Only briefly, but Victoria saw it. He said Aria was someone he had been helping. Victoria asked why someone he was supposedly helping was sending him intimate messages. Dalton said Aria had feelings for him. Then he claimed she had misunderstood their relationship. Then he said she was becoming too attached. Victoria heard 3 explanations in less than a minute. None explained the hotel. None explained the secret meetings. And none explained why Aria believed Dalton was going to leave his wife. Victoria confronted him again. This time, Dalton stopped denying everything. He admitted there had been a relationship. He said it was finished. He promised he wanted his marriage back. Victoria wanted to believe him. That was what made the betrayal hurt so deeply. She wasn't only angry. She was grieving the version of her husband she thought she knew. Dalton became more protective of his phone. Calls were taken outside. Messages disappeared quickly. And Aria's name surfaced again. Then Victoria received another piece of the conversation. Aria had written, "You need to decide what you're going to do." Victoria confronted Dalton. He told her the relationship was over. He said Aria was refusing to accept it. Victoria wanted the affair to be finished. She wanted her marriage to survive. But 3 days later, another message appeared. This one carried a completely different tone. "We need to talk about what happened." Victoria stared at those words. "What happened?" she asked Dalton. He refused to explain. Instead, he told her Aria was trying to destroy their marriage. Then he deleted the conversation. Victoria didn't know what Aria meant. She only knew one thing. The affair wasn't the entire story. Less than 2 weeks later, Aria Bennett was dead. Now detectives were sitting inside Victoria's home asking questions about the woman whose name had first appeared on Dalton's phone. They wanted to know about the affair, the meetings, the messages, and most importantly, when Dalton had last spoken to Aria. Victoria gave them everything she remembered. Then investigators compared her account with Dalton's. That's when they found the first serious contradiction. Dalton's version of the final days did not match the phone records. And the message Victoria couldn't stop thinking about suddenly sounded different. "We need to talk about what happened." Maybe Aria wasn't talking about the affair. Maybe she knew something else. Something she never got the chance to explain. Before Aria died, she had been trying to reach someone. And the person she contacted would eventually give detectives a reason to look beyond the marriage. Aria Bennett was dead. And detectives now needed to understand the man who had been closest to her in the final days. Dalton Hale. But Victoria couldn't stop thinking about one sentence. "We need to talk about what happened." At first, she believed Aria meant the affair. Investigators weren't convinced. Detectives requested the phone records. What they found immediately challenged Dalton's story. He had told Victoria that he stopped speaking to Aria after she confronted him. The records showed repeated contact, calls, messages, and one conversation only hours before Aria died. Dalton insisted he hadn't seen her that day. Then investigators examined the location data available from his phone. It placed him in the same general area where Aria had been. Not proof of a crime, but enough to make detectives ask a much harder question. Why had Dalton lied about contacting her? Victoria sat with investigators and felt the ground shift beneath everything she thought she knew. Days earlier, her pain had been about betrayal. Now there was something far more frightening. Her husband might have been lying about the final hours of another woman's life. Then detectives asked, "Did Aria ever contact you directly?" Victoria went quiet. There had been one message. She hadn't recognized the number. Dalton had told her Aria was trying to interfere with their marriage. Victoria had deleted it. But she remembered the words. "Please don't believe everything he tells you." At the time, Victoria thought Aria was jealous. Now detectives wanted to know why Aria had chosen Victoria as the person to warn. Investigators recovered the message from available records. The timing was crucial. Aria had sent it before her death. And there was something about the timing that made detectives reconsider the entire case. The message wasn't simply about Dalton cheating. Aria appeared to be warning Victoria about something she believed Dalton had done, or was capable of doing. But investigators still didn't know what Aria was trying to protect Victoria from. Then they found another communication from the same period. And this time, it pointed directly toward a meeting Dalton had never admitted happened. Victoria couldn't forget Aria's message. "Please don't believe everything he tells you." At first, Victoria thought it was jealousy. Now detectives were seeing something else. Aria may have been trying to protect her. Investigators reconstructed Aria's final 2 days. Her phone showed repeated attempts to reach Dalton. Some calls went unanswered. Then Dalton finally called her back. They spoke for several minutes. Investigators couldn't immediately determine what was said. But the timing mattered. The conversation happened shortly before Aria died. Then detectives found another important detail. Aria had tried to reach Victoria. Not to argue about Dalton. Not to demand that he leave his marriage. To make sure Victoria knew she wasn't being told the whole truth. That realization hit Victoria differently. The woman she had once viewed as the person invading her marriage had apparently been trying to warn her. And now Aria was gone. Victoria would never get the chance to ask what she meant. Never hear the explanation in Aria's own words. Only the message remained. Detectives asked Dalton why Aria had contacted Victoria. His response was immediate. He described Aria as emotionally attached to him. He said she was angry because he had ended their relationship. But investigators weren't satisfied. The phone records showed Aria wasn't simply chasing Dalton. She had been contacting other people. And one of those contacts had become extremely important. Because shortly before her death, Aria made one final call. Dalton didn't answer it. Victoria didn't know about it. And the person who did answer was someone investigators had never expected to find connected to Aria. That person's name would force detectives to reconsider what happened during Aria's final hours. The person Aria called was Mason Carter, one of Dalton's longtime business associates. When detectives interviewed Mason, he revealed something that shifted the investigation. Aria hadn't called him about the affair. She had called about money. Mason told investigators that Aria had discovered business funds were being used for expenses connected to her relationship with Dalton. She was angry, but she was also preparing to expose what she knew. Then Mason remembered something that concerned him. Aria had told him she was afraid Dalton would make her responsible if the financial records were discovered. That detail changed how detectives viewed her final days. She wasn't simply threatening to expose an affair. She may have been holding information that could damage Dalton professionally and personally. Victoria struggled to process it. Aria had once been the woman she blamed for breaking her marriage. Now she was beginning to see her differently. Aria had been trying to warn her. She had contacted Mason. She had questioned Dalton. And shortly before her death, she had apparently become afraid of what would happen if she revealed everything. Victoria had one question. What had Dalton done that made Aria fear him? Detectives brought Dalton back in for questioning. This time, his account was different. He admitted seeing Aria shortly before she died. He said they argued about their relationship and the money. But according to Dalton, he left while Aria was still alive. Investigators checked the timeline. There was a gap between the time Dalton said he left and the next confirmed activity from his phone. It wasn't long, but it couldn't be explained easily. Then detectives examined the phone data more closely. During that critical period, Dalton's device stopped providing the location information investigators had been tracking. When the signal appeared again, Dalton was somewhere else. And that location raised a new question. Why had Dalton never mentioned being there? Detectives didn't need Dalton to admit anything. They needed to establish where he was. His phone records placed him near the area where Aria was later found. Dalton maintained that he had already left. Then investigators located exterior surveillance from a nearby business. The footage showed Dalton's vehicle arriving and leaving later than he had claimed. The difference was measured in minutes, but those minutes fell within the estimated window of Aria's death. For detectives, that discrepancy mattered. For Victoria, it was devastating. She had already discovered that Dalton had betrayed their marriage. Now investigators were showing her evidence that his account of Aria's final evening might also be false. Victoria remembered the first question she had asked him. Who is Aria? He could have told her the truth. Instead, every explanation had led to another contradiction. And now she was beginning to wonder whether the man she married had been lying about far more than an affair. Then investigators examined Aria's communications after Dalton's departure. One number stood out. It appeared repeatedly. It wasn't Victoria. It wasn't Dalton. And it wasn't anyone investigators had previously connected to the case. The calls continued during the period surrounding Aria's death. Detectives now had a problem. Dalton's timeline was questionable. But another person had been communicating with Aria at almost the same time. The affair had put Dalton under suspicion. But the new phone number suggested someone else may have had a reason to want Aria silenced. The number belonged to Scarlett Lawson. She worked with Aria. When detectives questioned her, Scarlett admitted she had kept something from them. Aria had told her she was afraid, and Dalton wasn't the only person she feared. For Victoria, the case had become almost impossible to understand. At first, it seemed straightforward. A secret affair, a betrayed wife, a woman who knew too much. Now another person had entered Aria's final timeline, and Scarlett had her own reason for being angry with Aria. Scarlett told investigators that Aria had uncovered suspicious financial transactions at work, transactions that could expose someone close to her. But Scarlett wouldn't say who. Investigators compared her statement with the phone records. The records showed Scarlett had contacted Aria shortly before her death. Then they found another connection. Scarlett had also been communicating with Dalton. Two people who claimed to have separate reasons for contacting Aria were both communicating with her, and with each other. Why? Under further questioning, Scarlett finally admitted something she had initially left out. She had met Aria on the day Aria died. According to Scarlett, Aria was distressed. She believed someone was trying to make her take the blame for something she hadn't done. Then Aria said something Scarlett never forgot. Dalton isn't the person you should be afraid of. Victoria heard those words and felt a different kind of fear. If Aria had been telling the truth, Dalton might not have been the only person with something to hide. But Scarlett still hadn't explained why she contacted Dalton after meeting Aria. And when detectives compared the three phones, they discovered that Scarlett's version of that day contained one serious contradiction. Detectives went back through Aria's final hours. This time, they weren't looking at the affair. They were following the money, and the evidence led them back to Mason Carter. Scarlett had lied about one part of her story. She had met Aria that day, but she wasn't the person Aria feared. Aria had discovered that Mason had been diverting company money without Dalton's knowledge. When Aria threatened to expose the transactions, Mason confronted her. The meeting became violent. Aria died. Mason then tried to make Dalton look responsible. Dalton's affair gave him the perfect distraction. Investigators would naturally focus on the husband who had been lying about his relationship with Aria. And Mason counted on that. But Mason's story began falling apart. His account of that evening didn't match the records. Phone data contradicted his movements. Surveillance placed his vehicle where he said he had never been. Financial records established his connection to the transactions Aria had discovered. And a witness account filled another gap in the timeline. One by one, the explanations Mason had given investigators stopped making sense. The affair had placed Dalton under suspicion. But the evidence pointed somewhere else. Victoria had spent weeks believing Aria was the person who had stolen something from her. Her husband had betrayed her. But Aria had also been trying to warn her. That realization would stay with Victoria. Dalton had destroyed the trust inside their marriage. Mason was responsible for Aria's death. And the two truths had become tangled together until investigators finally separated them. Victoria never received the kind of explanation that could repair what Dalton had broken. Aria never got the opportunity to tell Victoria what she had discovered. But the evidence eventually told the story for her. The affair exposed Dalton's lies. The financial records exposed Mason's motive. And the timeline exposed the deception that had nearly sent investigators in the wrong direction. Aria's death was no longer an unanswered question. Her final warnings had not disappeared with her. They became part of the evidence that helped uncover the truth. Her life was taken, but her voice wasn't silenced. If you want more true crime stories where one overlooked detail can change an entire investigation, subscribe to The Veil of Secret. Because every victim deserves the truth, and every truth deserves to be heard.